In the cold depths of space, floating among the debris of a long-dead civilization, the Zephyrian research vessel Enlightened Pursuit made a discovery that would change the galaxy forever. What they found wasn't treasure or ancient technology. It was something far more dangerous. Encased in a primitive cryogenic pod, perfectly preserved for over 2 centuries, lay a creature from a species the galaxy had written off as extinct, a human being. The Zephyrians, masters of biological sciences and genetic manipulation, had studied thousands of species across the cosmos. They had cataloged, dissected, and understood the biological mechanisms of creatures from gas giants to crystalline beings. To them, reviving this frozen relic seemed like a simple academic exercise, a chance to study the legendary Death Worlders that had once terrorized the galaxy with their impossible resilience and inexplicable survival instincts. They thought they understood what they were dealing with. After all, how dangerous could one primitive human be against an advanced civilization that had conquered death itself? Their computers had run every simulation, their scientists had prepared every containment protocol, and their military had dismissed any real threat from a single being from a species that couldn't even achieve faster-than-light travel before their extinction. But the Zephyrians had made one critical error in their calculations. They had studied human biology, human technology, and human history from a safe distance. What they had never truly comprehended was the human spirit, that indefinable quality that had allowed humanity to crawl from the caves of Earth to touch the stars themselves, despite every cosmic force trying to stop them. As the cryogenic chamber began its revival sequence, and the first neural activity flickered across their monitors, the Zephyrians congratulated themselves on their scientific achievement. They had no idea they had just awakened something that would remind the galaxy why humans had once been feared across 1,000 worlds, and why some species should never be brought back from the dead. The revival was about to begin, and nothing in the galaxy would ever be the same. The surgical bay of the research vessel Enlightened Pursuit hummed with the quiet efficiency of advanced Zephyrian technology. Dr. Vextera, the ship's leading xenobiologist, watched the revival monitors with the detached curiosity of someone who had performed similar procedures hundreds of times before. Her 4 arms moved gracefully across the control panels, adjusting atmospheric composition and neural stimulation patterns with practiced precision. Cellular regeneration at 93%, announced her assistant, a younger Zephyrian named Kethmol, whose enthusiasm for xenobiology often exceeded his experience. The primitive freezing methods caused significant ice crystal damage, but our restoration protocols are compensating beautifully. Vextera's compound eyes reflected the soft blue glow of the monitors as she observed the readings. The human specimen was fascinating from a purely academic standpoint. The species had achieved cryogenic preservation through brute force methods, essentially flash freezing themselves and hoping for the best. It was crude compared to Zephyrian stasis technology, which could preserve a being in perfect temporal suspension for millennia without cellular degradation. Neural activity is increasing rapidly, Kethmol reported, his voice carrying a note of excitement. Much faster than our models predicted. The brain structure is remarkably resilient. The being strapped to the examination table was smaller than most sapient species, standing perhaps 2 meters in height with a lean but muscular build. Its skin was pale from centuries of preservation, covered in what appeared to be primitive clothing made from processed organic fibers. What struck Vextera most was how deceptively fragile it looked compared to the legends. Human history was taught in Galactic University as a cautionary tale about evolutionary dead ends. They were a species that had emerged from a death world called Earth, where nearly everything was designed to kill them. Yet instead of developing the natural armor, venom sacs, or psychic abilities that most death world species evolved, humans had remained essentially unchanged from their primitive ancestors. No natural weapons beyond small teeth and weak claws. No protective shell or hardened skin. No ability to see beyond the narrow visible spectrum or survive in hostile atmospheres. By all evolutionary logic, they should have died out before achieving sapience. Instead, they had somehow spread across dozens of star systems before their mysterious disappearance 2 centuries ago. The galaxy had breathed a collective sigh of relief when the last human colonies had gone silent. Now, Vexthera was about to wake one up. "Doctor, I'm seeing unusual brain wave patterns," Keth Mole said, his earlier enthusiasm replaced by concern. "The neural pathways are activating in sequences I've never observed before." Vexthera leaned closer to the monitors. Human brain scans were notoriously difficult to interpret. Their neural architecture was unlike any other known species. Instead of the orderly, hierarchical structures found in most sapient minds, human brains were chaotic networks of interconnected regions that seemed to function through controlled disorder. "It's within acceptable parameters," she decided. "Continue the revival sequence." The life support systems registered increasing metabolic activity as the human's body slowly returned to full function. Its heartbeat strengthened to a steady rhythm that seemed impossibly rapid compared to Zephyrian physiology. The breathing pattern stabilized, drawing in the carefully regulated atmosphere they had prepared based on Earth's historical composition. "Fascinating," Vexthera murmured as she recorded her observations. "The species' ability to survive the revival process exceeds our projections by a significant margin. Most beings suffer severe neural trauma from primitive cryogenic preservation, but this specimen appears to be experiencing complete cognitive restoration." The human's eyes remained closed, but subtle movements beneath the lids indicated active dreaming states. Vexthera had studied human sleep patterns in the archives and knew this was normal, though she found the concept of unconscious psychological processing during rest to be peculiarly inefficient. "Doctor, should we prepare the neural interface for communication?" Keth Mole asked. "Our translation matrices are ready to establish linguistic contact once consciousness is achieved." "Not yet," Vexthera replied. "I want to observe natural awakening patterns. The academic value of studying an unaltered human consciousness emerging from extended stasis is too significant to rush." Around them, the ship continued its deep space voyage toward the Zephyrian homeworld of Nexus Prime. The discovery of the human cryogenic pod had been entirely accidental. Their long-range sensors had detected an anomalous energy signature while conducting a routine survey of a dead solar system. What they found was the remnants of what appeared to be a human colony ship, torn apart by unknown forces and scattered across the system's asteroid field. The cryogenic pod had been the only intact piece of technology they could salvage, its primitive but robust design having survived whatever catastrophe had destroyed the rest of the vessel. Initial scans had confirmed the presence of a living human inside, preserved in a state of near-perfect suspension despite the crude methods employed. The discovery had sent ripples of excitement through the Zephyrian scientific community. Humans were legends, stories told to illustrate the dangers of uncontrolled evolutionary development. To find a living specimen was the xenobiological find of the century. "Doctor," Keth Mole said quietly, "the subject's vital signs are approaching full consciousness levels." Vexthera activated the observation protocols and moved to a safe distance from the examination table. Standard procedures required maintaining at least 3 meters between researchers and newly revived specimens until psychological stability could be confirmed. Not that she expected any real danger from the human. Their species was known for primitive emotional responses, but they lacked the physical capabilities to pose a genuine threat to advanced beings like the Zephyrians. The human's breathing pattern changed, becoming deeper and more irregular. Its fingers twitched slightly against the restraining straps, and its head moved fractionally from side to side. The monitors showed increasing brain activity across all regions, indicating the transition from unconscious to conscious states. Then, without any warning, the human's eyes snapped open. Vexthera found herself momentarily frozen by the intensity of that gaze. She had studied thousands of species and observed countless different visual organs, but there was something uniquely unsettling about human eyes. They were small and seemingly simple compared to her own compound structures, yet they held a quality of focused awareness that seemed to pierce straight through her. The human's head turned slowly, taking in its surroundings with methodical precision. Those strange binocular eyes moved across the surgical equipment, the monitoring devices, and finally settled on the two Zephyrians observing from across the room. There was no panic in the gaze, no confusion or fear that would be expected from a being awakening in unfamiliar circumstances. Instead, there was something that looked disturbingly like evaluation. "Greetings," Vextera said through the translation device, her voice projected as soothing harmonic tones that the universal translator would convert to whatever human auditory patterns were most calming. "You are safe. We are scientists who discovered your preservation chamber and have restored you to full biological function. Please remain calm while we—" The human spoke, and the translation device rendered its words in perfect Zephyrian. "How long?" The simplicity and directness of the question caught Vextera off guard. No requests for clarification about its situation, no emotional outbursts about its circumstances, no confusion about its location. Just a straightforward demand for information delivered in a tone that somehow managed to sound both calm and commanding. 217 years by your species' temporal measurements, Vextera replied. "You have been in cryogenic suspension for—" "Are there others?" the human interrupted. "Others of your species? I'm afraid not. You appear to be the sole survivor of whatever destroyed your vessel. We found you in a debris field where I know what happened to the ship," the human said quietly, and something in its tone made Vextera's breathing pause involuntarily. "I asked if there are others. Other humans. Alive. Anywhere." The question carried implications that Vextera hadn't considered. The way the human phrased it suggested knowledge of broader circumstances, an understanding of context that should have been impossible for someone who had been unconscious for over 2 centuries. Current galactic records indicate that human populations ceased communication with the greater galactic community approximately 200 years ago, she explained carefully. The general consensus is that your species experienced a catastrophic decline and is now extinct. The human was quiet for a long moment, and Vextera watched its facial expressions with fascination. Human emotional displays were remarkably transparent compared to most species. Their features seemed to broadcast internal states with startling clarity. What she saw in those moments was not grief or despair as she might have expected, but something that looked more like grim confirmation of suspected facts. "What's your name?" the human asked suddenly. "I am Dr. Vextera, senior xenobiologist aboard the research vessel Enlightened Pursuit. This is my assistant, Kethmol. Thank you for reviving me, Dr. Vextera," the human said with what appeared to be genuine gratitude. "My name is Marcus Chun, formerly of the Earth Colonial Defense Force, serial number 7749 Delta 9. I need to ask you some questions about the current state of galactic civilization." The casual mention of military service sent a subtle chill through Vextera's consciousness. She had read the historical accounts of human military capabilities, but those were ancient records, surely exaggerated by the fear and confusion of less advanced civilizations encountering human expansion for the first time. "Of course," she replied. "We're eager to learn about your species and your experiences. Perhaps we could begin by—" "Doctor," Marcus interrupted again, his tone patient but firm. "I appreciate your scientific interest, but I need to understand something first. What happened to the other Death World species? The Karathi? The Vexani hive minds? The Crystalline Collective?" Vextera exchanged glances with Kethmol. The human was referencing species that had been extinct for over a millennium, civilizations so ancient that they existed mainly as archaeological curiosities. How could a human know about them? "Those civilizations have been extinct for many centuries," she explained. "The Karathi died out in the Great Cooling nearly 800 years ago. The Vexani were destroyed by their own genetic experiments about 1,000 years past. As for the Crystalline Collective, they transcended physical existence so long ago that they're considered mythological by most modern scholars." Marcus nodded slowly, as if confirming information he already suspected. "And the current galactic powers?" who rules the major sectors now. The Zephyrian Concordat maintains administrative authority over approximately 40% of known space, Vexthera replied, growing more curious about the direction of the questioning. The hegemony of United Worlds controls another 30%, while various smaller federations and independent systems make up the remainder. No more Death World species, Marcus said, and it wasn't quite a question. Well, no. Death World species tend to be unstable over long periods. They typically either destroy themselves or evolve beyond the need for physical existence. It's considered a natural part of galactic development. Marcus was quiet again, and this time Vexthera could see him processing information with the kind of methodical thoroughness that reminded her uncomfortably of advanced computer systems. When he spoke again, his voice carried a quality that made her unconsciously step backward. "Doctor, I need you to understand something very important," Marcus said, his eyes never leaving hers. "Humans didn't go extinct naturally. We didn't destroy ourselves, and we didn't evolve beyond physical existence. We were eliminated systematically by a coalition of galactic powers who decided that Death World species were too dangerous to be allowed to exist." The surgical bay fell silent except for the quiet hum of life support systems. Vexthera felt her breathing rate increase as the implications of the human's words settled into her consciousness. That's not in any historical record," she said weakly. Marcus smiled, and the expression somehow made him look more dangerous rather than more friendly. "Of course it isn't. History is written by the survivors, Doctor. And the galaxy made very sure that humans wouldn't be among them." He shifted slightly against the restraining straps, testing their strength with movements so subtle that Vexthera almost missed them. "There's something else you need to know about humans, Doctor. Something your historical records probably didn't mention because the civilizations that could have told you about it didn't survive their encounters with us." "What's that?" Vexthera asked, though she was no longer certain she wanted to hear the answer. "We don't forgive," Marcus said simply, "and we never, ever forget." The monitors around the examination table began showing elevated readings across all human biological functions, but not in patterns that indicated distress or fear. Instead, they showed the systematic preparation of an organism designed by evolution to face impossible odds and emerge victorious. Dr. Vexthera, senior xenobiologist of the Zephyrian Concordat and expert on galactic species development, suddenly realized that she might have made the single greatest mistake in her civilization's history. She had awakened something that the galaxy had spent 2 centuries trying to forget existed. And Marcus Chun was just getting started. The restraining straps were designed to hold beings 3 times the strength of baseline humans, but Marcus wasn't trying to break free through brute force. Instead, he had spent the last several minutes systematically testing their flexibility, pressure distribution, and attachment points while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation with Dr. Vexthera. He had learned long ago that the most effective weapon a human possessed wasn't strength or speed. It was the ability to think several moves ahead while making everyone else believe they were still playing by the established rules. "Doctor," Marcus said, his voice maintaining the same calm, almost conversational tone that was clearly making the Zephyrian increasingly uncomfortable. "I need you to access your ship's historical archives and search for any references to something called the Cleansing Protocol." Vexthera's compound eyes flickered rapidly, a sign of agitation that Marcus recognized from his extensive xenobiology training. The Zephyrians thought they were the galaxy's experts on alien species, but the Earth Colonial Defense Force had made studying potential enemies their specialty for good reason. I don't recognize that reference," Vexthera admitted. "Perhaps if you could provide more context about what you're referring to?" Marcus shifted his weight slightly, using the movement to test the table's construction. Zephyrian engineering was elegant, but focused on efficiency over durability. They had never needed to build things to withstand the systematic destruction that humans specialized in. The Cleansing Protocol was the Galactic Coalition's final solution to what they called the Death World problem, Marcus explained, watching both Zephyrians carefully for their reactions. It was implemented about 250 years ago, designed to eliminate any species that had evolved on worlds classified as unsuitable for sapient life. Kethmol moved closer to his mentor, his four arms wrapping around his torso in what Marcus recognized as a Zephyrian comfort gesture. But death worlds don't produce stable, sapient species, the younger alien said uncertainly. The environmental pressures are too extreme. Any life forms that develop, they're inevitably too aggressive for peaceful coexistence. That was the official justification. Marcus agreed. The real reason was simpler. Death world species were unpredictable. You couldn't control them through economic pressure, couldn't intimidate them with superior technology, and couldn't negotiate with them as equals because they didn't think like the rest of you. He paused, letting his gaze move between the two scientists. But most importantly, death world species had a tendency to exceed their predicted development curves. The galactic establishment couldn't accept the idea that primitive, violent creatures from hostile worlds might eventually surpass their advanced civilizations. The medical monitors continued tracking Marcus's biological functions, and he could see Vexthera glancing at the displays with growing concern. His heart rate was elevated but steady. His brain activity was showing patterns unlike anything in her databases, and his muscle tension was increasing in ways that suggested preparation for action rather than stress response. The Karathi were the first to go. Marcus continued, his voice taking on the tone of someone recounting historical facts rather than personal grievances. They were apex predators from a world where the surface temperature reached 200 degrees during the day and dropped to -50 at night. They had developed limited space flight and were beginning to establish colonies when their homeworld suffered what was recorded as a natural stellar event, a solar flare that sterilized their entire planet. Vexthera's breathing became more rapid. Solar events are unpredictable cosmic phenomena. They can't be artificially induced. Marcus smiled again, and this time there was no warmth in the expression whatsoever. Doctor, when you've advanced to the point where you can manipulate stellar mechanics, there's very little that can't be artificially induced. The Karathi flare was generated by a network of gravity manipulation devices placed in their star's core over a period of 50 years. The revelation hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. Kethmol made a small sound that might have been distress, while Vexthera remained frozen in what appeared to be shock. The Vexani hive minds were next. Marcus continued relentlessly. Their genetic experiments didn't go wrong naturally. They were sabotaged by researchers who introduced corrupted data into their biological databases. The hive minds trusted the information because it came from galactic scientific institutions they considered allies. The surgical bay's atmosphere felt increasingly heavy as Marcus methodically destroyed centuries of accepted galactic history. The crystalline collective didn't transcend physical existence. They were convinced to upload their consciousness into a quantum matrix that was subsequently destroyed. They exist now as electromagnetic echoes in dead computer systems, aware but unable to interact with physical reality. Vexthera finally found her voice. "These are serious accusations," she said, though her tone suggested she was beginning to believe them. "If what you're saying is true, it would mean that the current galactic order was built on systematic genocide." "Not genocide," Marcus corrected. "Extermination. Genocide implies killing members of the same species. What happened to the Death World species was more like pest control from the perspective of the galactic establishment." He tested the restraints again, this time applying pressure in a specific pattern that would stress the molecular bonds in the synthetic materials. Humans had always been excellent at finding the weak points in seemingly superior technology. The elimination of Death World species wasn't motivated by hatred or fear in the way you might understand those emotions, Marcus explained. It was a practical decision made by civilizations that viewed the galaxy as a garden to be carefully cultivated. Death World species were weeds, potentially useful in small quantities, but ultimately incompatible with the orderly development they envisioned. Kethmol stepped closer to Vexthera, seeking comfort from proximity to his mentor. "But humans were the last Death World species," he said quietly. If the protocol was implemented 250 years ago, why did humanity survive for another 50 years? Because humans were different from the other Death World species in one crucial way, Marcus replied. The others were individually superior to baseline galactic civilizations, stronger, faster, more resilient, but ultimately limited by their biology. Humans were individually inferior to most other sapient species, but we had developed something that no one else possessed. What was that? Vexthera asked, though she seemed reluctant to hear the answer. Cooperation, Marcus said simply. Not just within our own species, but with anyone and anything that could help us achieve our goals. We formed alliances with artificial intelligences, uplifted non-sapient species to serve as partners rather than servants, and developed technologies through collaborative research rather than jealously guarded secrets. The lights in the surgical bay dimmed slightly as the ship's power systems automatically adjusted to evening cycles. In the reduced illumination, Marcus's expression became harder to read, which somehow made his presence more unsettling rather than less threatening. The galactic establishment tried their usual methods with humanity first, Marcus continued. Economic pressure failed because we had developed closed-loop resource systems that made us independent of galactic trade networks. Military intimidation was ineffective because human tactics were designed around asymmetric warfare against superior opponents. Diplomatic isolation didn't work because we had already established relationships with over 200 non-aligned species and 17 artificial intelligence collectives. Vexthera was accessing her ship's database through her neural interface, searching for historical references that might support or contradict Marcus's claims. What she found was a disturbing pattern of gaps in the historical record, missing data that had never been questioned because it was easier to accept incomplete information than to investigate uncomfortable possibilities. By the time the Galactic Coalition realized that standard extermination methods wouldn't work against humanity, we had already figured out what had happened to the other Death World species, Marcus said. We had reverse-engineered their elimination techniques, identified the responsible parties, and begun developing countermeasures. The restraints creaked almost inaudibly as Marcus applied precisely calculated stress to their weakest points. The sound was so quiet that the Zephyrians didn't notice, but Marcus could feel the synthetic materials beginning to fatigue. The final phase of the cleansing protocol was implemented specifically for humanity, Marcus said. It was called the Cascade Event, a coordinated attack using weapons designed to target human biological markers specifically. The entire operation was timed to eliminate all human populations simultaneously across dozens of star systems. Kethmol was trembling now, his four arms wrapped tightly around his torso. But it worked, he whispered. Humanity disappeared. The colonies went silent. The Cascade Event succeeded. Marcus's expression became something that might have been pride mixed with grim satisfaction. The Cascade Event eliminated 94% of human population across all colonies and homeworld installations. It was remarkably effective, considering that we had less than 6 months to prepare countermeasures once we identified the threat. 6% survival rate, Vexthera calculated automatically. That would still represent millions of individuals. 1.8 million survivors, to be precise, Marcus confirmed, scattered across 17 hidden facilities and systems that had been prepared specifically for this possibility. The colonial defense protocols required that a minimum viable population be preserved to ensure species continuity and eventual retaliation. The word retaliation fell into the surgical bay like a stone into still water, creating ripples of implication that spread outward until they touched everything in the room. Vexthera found herself backing away from the examination table without conscious decision, her scientific curiosity overwhelmed by a growing sense of danger. The survivors have spent the last 2 centuries rebuilding, Marcus continued conversationally. Not just human population, but human capability. We learned from the Cascade Event. We adapted. We improved. Marcus tested the restraints one final time and felt the molecular bonds give way just enough to allow movement when he chose to act. The Zephyrians had no idea that their prisoner was no longer actually restrained. Dr. Vexera, Marcus said, and his tone carried the authority of someone who was accustomed to being obeyed without question. I need you to understand something very clearly. The human you've awakened isn't a relic from extinct species. I'm an advanced scout for a civilization that has spent 200 years preparing to remind the galaxy exactly why Death World species were feared in the first place. The surgical bay's emergency lighting activated as the ship's sensors detected elevated stress indicators from the examination room's occupants. In the red-tinged illumination, Marcus looked less like a primitive specimen and more like something that had crawled out of the darkest nightmares of civilized space. The question now, Marcus said quietly, is whether you're going to help me contact my people or whether I'm going to have to take this ship to them the hard way. Vexera stared at the human strapped to her examination table and realized that everything she thought she knew about the galaxy was about to change forever. The legends about Death World species weren't exaggerations or primitive superstitions. They were warnings that no one had been smart enough to heed. And now it was too late to run. The bridge of enlightened pursuit hummed with the controlled chaos of a research vessel operating at the edge of known space. Captain Zephyra, a veteran Zephyrian who had commanded deep space expeditions for over 3 decades, reviewed the routine status reports with practiced efficiency. His crew was composed of the Concordat's finest scientists and explorers, individuals whose dedication to expanding galactic knowledge had led them to volunteer for missions that kept them away from civilization for years at a time. It was a peaceful existence, one that Captain Zethkora found deeply satisfying after a youth spent serving in the Concordat's military forces during the border conflicts with the hegemony. Academic pursuits were far preferable to warfare, and the discovery of the ancient human specimen had promised to be the highlight of his scientific career. That sense of peaceful accomplishment was shattered when Dr. Vextera's voice crackled through the ship's communication system with an edge of panic he had never heard from the normally composed scientist. Captain, I need you to implement immediate security protocols around the surgical bay. Do not allow anyone else to enter this section, and prepare the ship for emergency departure from this system. Zethkora's primary hands moved across his command console, while his secondary arms gestured for his crew to maintain their positions. Doctor, please clarify the nature of the emergency. Are you experiencing a medical crisis with the specimen? The specimen is awake, Captain, Vextera replied, and something in her tone made the bridge crew exchange glances of concern. And we need to discuss the implications of what we've discovered immediately. Understood. I'm dispatching security to your location and coming down personally to assess the situation. No. Vextera's response was sharp enough to make several crew members turn toward the communication console. Do not send security personnel, and do not come down here yourself. I need you to access the ship's deep archives and search for any historical references to the cleansing protocol. Immediately. Captain Zethkora had served in enough crisis situations to recognize when one of his officers was operating under extreme stress. The fact that Dr. Vextera was requesting historical research rather than immediate assistance suggested that the situation was more complex than a simple medical emergency. Initiating archive search now, he replied, signaling his data specialist to begin the requested research. Doctor, can you provide any additional context for this search? Look for any references to systematic elimination of Death World species approximately 250 years ago, Vextera said. Cross-reference with stellar events, genetic contamination incidents, and technological failures affecting entire civilizations. The request sent a chill through the bridge crew that had nothing to do with the ship's environmental systems. What Dr. Vextera was describing sounded like conspiracy theories rather than legitimate historical research. Doctor, Captain Zethkora said carefully, perhaps you should explain exactly what the human specimen has told you. We need to understand what information has led to these requests. There was a long pause before Vextera responded, and when she did, her voice carried the weight of someone who had just discovered that everything she believed about the universe was wrong. Captain, the The human claims that the disappearance of Death World species over the last millennium was not the result of natural evolution or self-destruction. According to his account, they were systematically exterminated by a coalition of galactic powers who viewed them as threats to civilized development. The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of ship systems and the soft chittering of data processors working through the archive search. Captain Zethkora found himself staring at the communication console as if it might provide some rational explanation for what he had just heard. That would be an extraordinary claim, he said finally. What evidence does the specimen offer to support these allegations? He's providing specific details about the elimination methods used against each species, Vexthera replied. Information that isn't in any of our historical records, but which explains discrepancies in the data that we've always attributed to incomplete archives. The data specialist, a young Zephyrian named Kextal, gestured for Captain Zethkora's attention. Sir, I'm finding significant gaps in our historical records for the time periods Dr. Vexthera mentioned. Large sections of data appear to have been deliberately removed rather than lost through normal degradation. Captain Zethkora moved to the data console and reviewed the preliminary search results. What he saw there made his breathing chambers contract with stress. The pattern of missing information was too systematic to be coincidental, too comprehensive to be accidental. Continue the search, he ordered. I want everything we have on Death World species elimination, regardless of how it's classified in our archives. On the surgical bay, Marcus listened to the ship's internal communications through his enhanced hearing while maintaining the appearance of casual conversation with Dr. Vexthera. The Zephyrians had excellent technology, but they had never learned to properly shield their electronic systems against directed listening techniques. Your captain is beginning to understand the scope of what you've discovered, Marcus told Vexthera. That's good. It means you're taking this seriously instead of dismissing it as the ramblings of a primitive mind. Vexthera had moved to the far side of the surgical bay, as far from the examination table as the room's dimensions would allow. If what you're telling us is true, it would mean that our entire civilization is built on foundations that would make you complicit in genocide, Marcus finished for her. Yes, that's exactly what it means. Keth Mole was accessing the ship's archives through his neural interface, searching for any information that might contradict or confirm Marcus's claims. What he found was even more disturbing than the gaps in the historical record. He found evidence that the gaps had been created intentionally, with sophisticated data modification techniques that suggested official rather than accidental loss. There are archive markers, Keth Mole said quietly. Timestamps that indicate massive data deletions approximately 150 years ago. The modifications were made by high-level administrative authority. The cover-up, Marcus said with grim satisfaction. They waited 50 years after the last human colonies went silent to make sure there were no survivors who might contradict the official story. Then, they sanitized the historical records to remove any evidence of the cleansing protocol. Vexthera's compound eyes reflected the surgical bay's lighting as she processed the implications of what they were discovering. But why preserve any information at all? If the goal was to hide these events, why not delete everything? Because complete erasure would have been suspicious, Marcus explained. Better to leave fragments that support the official narrative while removing anything that contradicts it. Death World species destroyed themselves through their own violent nature. That's a story that fits everyone's preconceptions and doesn't require uncomfortable questions about who might have helped the process along. The communication system crackled again as Captain Zethkora's voice filled the surgical bay. Doctor, my data specialist has found references to something called the Stability Initiative in classified military archives. The documentation is fragmentary, but it appears to describe coordination between multiple galactic powers to address what they termed evolutionary threats to civilized development. Marcus nodded, as if he had expected this discovery. The Stability Initiative was the bureaucratic name for the cleansing protocol, much more pleasant sounding than systematic extermination of inconvenient species, don't you think? Vexthera was beginning to understand that her encounter with Marcus represented more than just a scientific discovery. It was a reckoning with historical truths that her civilization had spent centuries trying to forget. "What do you want from us?" she asked directly. "What is the purpose of telling us these things?" Marcus's expression became thoughtful, almost contemplative. "Doctor, what I want is very simple. I want you to understand exactly what your people helped create when they participated in the cleansing protocol. I want you to comprehend the full scope of what was lost when the Death World species were eliminated." He shifted on the examination table, the movement causing the damaged restraints to creak ominously. "The galaxy you know today is a sterile, predictable place where every species thinks in similar patterns and develops along approved technological paths. It's stable, peaceful, and utterly stagnant. The surgical bay's environmental systems adjusted automatically as they detected elevated stress levels from all occupants. The recycled air carried a faint metallic taste that reminded Vexthera of her homeworld's industrial districts. Death World species brought chaos to the galaxy," Marcus continued. "They developed in ways that no one could predict, formed alliances that defied conventional logic, and created technologies that shouldn't have been possible according to established scientific principles. They were living proof that the universe was far stranger and more dangerous than civilized space wanted to admit." Keth Mole looked up from his archive search with an expression of growing horror. "I'm finding military records that describe Death World species as probability hazards," he said. "They were classified as threats not because of what they were doing, but because of what they might eventually become." "Exactly," Marcus confirmed. "The galactic establishment wasn't just eliminating current threats. They were preventing future possibilities that they couldn't control or understand. It was the ultimate expression of civilized space's need for order and predictability." Captain Zethkora's voice came through the communication system again, this time with an edge of barely controlled panic. "Doctor, I'm seeing references to Zephyrian involvement in the Stability Initiative. Our own government participated in these operations." The revelation hit Vexthera like a physical blow. Her people, her civilization, the scientific institutions she had dedicated her life to serving. All of them were built on foundations of systematic murder and deliberate historical erasure. "Now you're beginning to understand," Marcus said gently, and for the first time there was something approaching sympathy in his voice. "The galaxy you've lived in your entire life is a lie. Every peaceful interaction between species, every cooperative research initiative, every diplomatic achievement, all of it exists only because the elements that might have disrupted this artificial harmony were deliberately removed." Vexthera found herself sitting on the surgical bay floor without memory of deciding to do so. The weight of what they had discovered was crushing her ability to maintain normal function. "But the survivors you mentioned," she said weakly, "the 1.8 million humans who escaped the Cascade event. What happened to them?" Marcus's expression became something that might have been pride mixed with anticipation of long-awaited justice. "They did what humans have always done when faced with impossible odds, Doctor. They adapted, they improved, and they remembered." The lights in the surgical bay flickered as the ship's power systems detected an anomaly in their energy distribution network. Marcus had been slowly draining power from the examination table systems, preparing for what was about to happen next. "The human survivors spent 200 years becoming something that the galaxy has never seen before," Marcus said. "They combined Death World resilience with advanced technology, human cooperation with systematic patience, and most importantly, they learned from every mistake that had led to their near extinction." The restraints finally gave way completely as Marcus sat up on the examination table, no longer pretending to be restrained. Vexthera and Kethmol backed against the far wall, but Marcus made no aggressive moves toward them. "Doctor," Marcus said calmly, "you and your colleagues are about to become witnesses to the return of the Death World species. Not as the primitive, chaotic forces that were eliminated 2 centuries ago, but as something far more dangerous. Death World species that have learned to be patient systematic, and utterly ruthless in pursuit of their goals. The surgical bay's emergency alarms began to sound as the ship's sensors detected unauthorized movement and system modifications. But Marcus was no longer interested in maintaining the pretense of captivity. "Contact your government," Marcus told Vexthera as he stood and began examining the surgical equipment with professional interest. "Tell them that Marcus Chun, advanced scout for the Human Reclamation Force, has a message for every species that participated in the cleansing protocol." "What message?" Vexthera whispered. Marcus smiled, and this time the expression was absolutely terrifying in its complete lack of warmth or mercy. "We remember everything. We forgive nothing. And we're coming home." The corridors of the Enlightened Pursuit had never been designed with security in mind. As a research vessel operating in deep space, its primary concerns were scientific efficiency and crew comfort, not preventing hostile takeover by primitive specimens. This oversight became critically apparent as Marcus Chun moved through the ship's passages with the fluid precision of someone who had spent years studying Zephyrian architecture and identifying its weaknesses. Captain Zethkora watched helplessly from the bridge as his ship's internal sensors tracked the human's movement through areas that should have been impossible for an unauthorized individual to access. The security systems that should have locked down automatically in response to an intruder alert were somehow failing to engage, as if they couldn't properly identify Marcus as a threat. "How is he accessing restricted sections?" demanded Lieutenant Kexmore, the ship's security officer who was frantically trying to implement containment protocols that seemed to have no effect on their unexpected guest. "Human bioelectric signatures are different from baseline galactic species," reported the sensor technician, her forearms working across multiple control interfaces simultaneously. "Our identification systems are designed to recognize Zephyrian, hegemony, and other standard biological patterns. The human's neural and cardiovascular signatures don't match any of our security parameters." Captain Zethkora realized with growing horror that their entire ship had been designed around the assumption that the only sapient beings they might encounter would be members of established galactic civilizations. The possibility of dealing with something genuinely alien had never been considered. "Sir," called out Navigation Officer Pexthil from his position at the helm controls, "I'm detecting unauthorized access to our navigation systems. Someone is downloading our stellar cartography databases. Can you trace the access point?" "The signals are coming from multiple locations simultaneously," Pexthil replied, his voice carrying a note of confusion. "It appears that the intruder has somehow gained access to our main computer core, but the physical access panels show no signs of tampering." Marcus, currently located 3 decks below the bridge in the ship's primary data storage facility, would have been amused by the crew's confusion if he hadn't been completely focused on his current task. The Zephyrians had excellent computer technology, but they had designed it around the assumption that users would access it through official interfaces. They had never considered the possibility of someone who could interface directly with their systems through bioelectric manipulation. The enhanced neural modifications that all Colonial Defense Force scouts received included the ability to interact with electronic systems through directed electromagnetic fields generated by specialized implants. It was technology that had been developed specifically for situations where human operatives might need to access alien computer systems without traditional interface methods. "Computer, display current location relative to known human settlements," Marcus whispered to the data terminal he was interfacing with through direct neural connection. The Zephyrian computer system, interpreting his bioelectric signals as authorized access commands, immediately displayed a 3-dimensional map of the surrounding star systems. What Marcus saw there made him pause his data collection and focus entirely on the navigation display. The Enlightened Pursuit was currently located less than 2 parsecs from Kepler 442, a star system that had housed one of the largest human colonial populations before the Cascade event. More importantly, it was the location of Research Station Omega-7, one of the hidden facilities where human survivors had been rebuilding their civilization for the past 2 centuries. Marcus's expression became grim as he realized the implications of the ship's current position. The Zephyrians had found the human cryogenic pod in this system, which meant they had been conducting detailed surveys of the area. If they had been thorough in their investigation, they might have already detected signs of the hidden human installation. Computer, display all sensor logs for this system over the past 6 months, Marcus commanded. The data that appeared on the screen confirmed his worst fears. The Zephyrian ship had conducted comprehensive scans of every planetary body, asteroid, and artificial structure in the system. Their sensors had detected the electromagnetic signatures that indicated active technology, but their analysis had dismissed the readings as natural phenomena or ancient automated systems. Marcus knew better. Those signatures were the carefully disguised energy patterns of Research Station Omega-7, home to over 40,000 human survivors and their most advanced technology development facility. The Zephyrians had unknowingly discovered one of humanity's most important secret installations. This changed everything. What had begun as an intelligence-gathering mission had suddenly become a critical security situation. If the Zephyrians returned to their government with detailed sensor logs of this system, human analysts would eventually identify the hidden installation. The survivors had spent 2 centuries avoiding detection. That security was about to be compromised by accident. Marcus completed his data download and began moving through the ship toward a new objective. He was no longer just gathering information. He was implementing damage control protocols that would ensure the continued secrecy of human survivor populations. On the bridge, Captain Zethkura was receiving increasingly disturbing reports from throughout his vessel. The human had somehow gained access to virtually every system on the ship, downloading information with systematic thoroughness while avoiding direct contact with any crew members. "Captain," reported Dr. Vexthera through the communication system, "I'm reviewing the human's behavioral patterns, and I believe we need to reconsider our assessment of the situation. This individual is not displaying the chaotic, emotional responses that we would expect from a primitive species under stress." "What do you mean, Doctor?" Marcus Chun is operating with methodical precision and advanced technical knowledge. His movement through the ship suggests detailed familiarity with Zephyrian technology and architecture. This level of sophistication is inconsistent with our understanding of human developmental capabilities. Captain Zethkura reviewed the sensor data that tracked the human's progress through his ship. Dr. Vexthera was correct. The movement pattern showed someone who understood exactly how Zephyrian vessels were constructed and where their critical systems were located. "Doctor, are you suggesting that this human has been specifically trained to infiltrate and compromise Zephyrian technology?" "That's exactly what I'm suggesting, Captain. Marcus Chun isn't just a survivor from an extinct civilization. He's an operative from a civilization that has spent 2 centuries preparing to confront the species that participated in their near extinction." The implications of this revelation spread through the bridge crew like a plague. They had not discovered an ancient relic from a dead civilization. They had accidentally captured an advanced scout from an enemy that had been preparing for war, while the rest of the galaxy believed it was extinct. "Sir," called out Lieutenant Kexmore from the security station, "I'm detecting significant power fluctuations in our main reactor systems. Someone has gained access to our primary power grid." Captain Zethkura felt his breathing chambers contract with stress. "Can you regain control of the systems?" "Negative, sir. The access methods being used are unlike anything in our security databases. It appears that the intruder is manipulating our power grid through direct electromagnetic interface, rather than traditional control mechanisms." Marcus had reached the ship's main reactor chamber, a massive cylindrical room lined with the crystalline power conduits that provided energy for all of the vessel's systems. The Zephyrians used a form of controlled matter-antimatter annihilation that was remarkably efficient, but also inherently vulnerable to electromagnetic disruption. "This is Marcus Chun to Research Station Omega-7. He spoke quietly to his communication implants while simultaneously interfacing with the reactor control systems. "Priority Alpha Emergency Protocol. The Zephyrian research vessel that discovered my position has detailed sensor logs of your location. Recommend immediate implementation of Concealment Protocol 7 and preparation for possible relocation. The response came through his neural implants within seconds. Acknowledged, Agent Shun. Station Commander requests immediate tactical assessment of Zephyrian capabilities and intentions. Zephyrians appear to be genuine scientific researchers rather than military reconnaissance. Marcus replied, while carefully adjusting power flow patterns to prevent the crew from regaining control of their ship. However, they have confirmed that multiple galactic powers participated in the cleansing protocol. Assume hostile intent from all Zephyrian Concordat governmental authorities. Understood. What is your current tactical situation? Marcus completed his modifications to the reactor control systems and began moving toward the ship's communication array. I have control of the vessel and access to their complete database. Recommend that I implement standard intelligence protocols to prevent information leakage while extracting maximum intelligence value from this contact. Approved. Execute Protocol 77 Alpha and maintain your position until extraction can be arranged. Marcus acknowledged the transmission and continued toward his next objective. Protocol 77 Alpha was designed for situations where human operatives had gained control of alien vessels. It required comprehensive intelligence extraction followed by strategic misinformation to ensure that any eventual reports would be dismissed as unreliable. On the bridge, the crew watched helplessly as their ship's systems fell under the control of someone who understood their technology better than they did. The human had somehow gained access to every critical system while remaining completely undetected by their security measures. Captain, reported the communications officer, our long-range transmission systems have been modified. All outgoing messages are being filtered through an unknown system before transmission. What kind of modifications? The signals appear to be normal Zephyrian communications, but they're being processed through what looks like a translation and analysis program. Someone is monitoring and potentially altering everything we try to transmit. Captain Zefkura realized that they were no longer in control of their own vessel. The human had systematically compromised every system that might allow them to call for help or report their situation to Zephyrian authorities. Sir, called out Dr. Vexera through the communication system. I need to speak with you privately. I've been reviewing the historical data we discovered about the cleansing protocol, and I think we need to consider the possibility that attempting to resist or escape might trigger responses we're not prepared to handle. What do you mean, Doctor? Captain, if human survivors have spent 2 centuries preparing for contact with the species that participated in their near extinction, they would have developed protocols for exactly this situation. Marcus Chun hasn't harmed any of us, but he's demonstrated complete control over our vessel and access to our most sensitive information. The terrible truth of their situation settled over the bridge crew like a suffocating blanket. They were no longer the advanced representatives of galactic civilization studying a primitive relic. They had become test subjects in an intelligence operation conducted by a species that had every reason to view them as enemies. The question, Dr. Vexthara continued, is whether we cooperate with their intelligence gathering and hope they allow us to survive the encounter, or whether we attempt to resist and discover just how dangerous Death World species can be when they decide you're a threat. Captain Zefkora stared at his control panels, all of which now displayed status indicators that he couldn't influence or modify. His ship, his crew, and his mission were now completely at the mercy of a human who had spent 2 centuries learning to hate everything the Zephyrian Concordat represented. Doctor, he said quietly, I think we're about to discover why the galaxy was so eager to eliminate Death World species. And, in the depths of the ship, Marcus Chun continued his methodical intelligence gathering, preparing to send a message that would change the balance of power in the galaxy forever. 3 days after Marcus Chun had taken control of the Enlightened Pursuit, the ship hung motionless in the void between star systems, its crew confined to quarters while their unexpected guest completed his intelligence gathering operation. The Zephyrians had quickly learned that resistance was not only futile, but potentially dangerous, as Marcus had demonstrated an intimate knowledge of their physiology that made his casual threats about pressure point manipulation and nervous system disruption disturbingly credible. Dr. Vexthera sat in her laboratory, surrounded by research data that had been completely recontextualized by the revelations of the past few days. Every scientific paper she had ever published, every xenobiological theory she had developed, every assumption she had made about galactic development, all of it was now suspect in light of what Marcus had revealed about the systematic elimination of Death World species. The communication system activated with the soft chime that indicated an incoming message from the ship's current commander. Marcus had been surprisingly courteous in his treatment of the crew, allowing them access to food, medical facilities, and recreational areas while restricting their access to communication and navigation systems. Dr. Vexthera, please report to the main conference room. Marcus's voice carried the same calm, professional tone that had become unsettlingly familiar over the past 3 days. I need to discuss the final phase of my mission with the senior staff. Vexthera made her way through corridors that felt alien despite being part of the ship she had called home for the past 2 years. Knowing that every system was under the control of someone who represented everything her civilization had tried to eliminate made even familiar spaces feel hostile and dangerous. The conference room had been modified during Marcus's occupation of the ship. The standard Zephyrian holographic display system had been replaced with what appeared to be human technology that projected three-dimensional images with startling clarity and detail. Captain Zakura, Lieutenant Kexmore, and the other senior staff were already seated around the table, their expressions mixing fear, curiosity, and resignation in equal measure. Marcus stood at the head of the table, his appearance somehow more imposing despite wearing borrowed Zephyrian clothing that was obviously too large for his smaller frame. The past 3 days had allowed the crew to observe him more carefully, and what they had seen was profoundly unsettling. Marcus moved with the efficiency of someone who never wasted motion, spoke with the precision of someone who had been trained to extract maximum information from every interaction, and observed everything with the intensity of someone who viewed every detail as potentially useful intelligence. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus began, using the formal address protocols he had learned from the ship's database. I want to thank you for your cooperation over the past several days. Your willingness to provide access to your historical archives and technical specifications has been invaluable to my mission. Captain Zethkura shifted uncomfortably in his chair. What exactly has your mission accomplished, Mr. Chun? What information have you gathered that required taking control of our vessel? Marcus activated the holographic display, and the conference room filled with a three-dimensional star map that showed the current positions of major galactic civilizations. Pulsing markers indicated the locations of Zephyrian Concordat territories, hegemony space, and dozens of smaller political entities. I have confirmed the current military capabilities, political structures, and technological development levels of all major galactic powers, Marcus replied. More importantly, I have verified that the species responsible for the cleansing protocol are still in positions of authority and continue to view Death World species as existential threats to galactic stability. The star map zoomed in to show specific systems, each marked with detailed information about military installations, population centers, and strategic resources. The level of detail was far beyond what any single research vessel could have gathered, suggesting that Marcus had been receiving information from other sources throughout his mission. The Human Reclamation Force has spent 2 centuries preparing for our return to galactic civilization, Marcus continued. We have developed technologies that exceed current galactic standards, established military capabilities that account for the tactical advantages of all major species, and, most importantly, we have learned to think strategically rather than reactively. Dr. Vexthera found her voice despite the growing dread that filled her thoughts. What does that mean for the current galactic order? What do you intend to do with the information you've gathered? Marcus's expression became something that might have been sadness, mixed with grim determination. Doctor, the current galactic order is built on foundations of systematic murder and historical denial. Every peaceful interaction between species exists only because the elements that might have challenged that artificial harmony were deliberately eliminated. The holographic display changed to show historical timelines, correlating the disappearance of Death World species with periods of increased galactic stability and reduced technological innovation. The pattern was unmistakable once presented clearly. The galaxy had traded dynamism for predictability, progress for peace. Human survivors represent more than just the remnants of an extinct species, Marcus said. We are living proof that the galactic establishment's vision of ordered civilization was achieved through genocide. Our very existence challenges the legitimacy of every government, every treaty, and every institution that participated in or benefited from the cleansing protocol. Lieutenant Kexmore leaned forward in his chair, his forearms gesturing with agitation. But that was centuries ago. The current governments weren't responsible for those decisions. Why should modern civilizations be held accountable for ancient crimes? Marcus turned to look directly at the security officer, and his expression was absolutely cold. Lieutenant, 3 days ago your ship discovered my cryogenic pod and revived me with the intention of studying me as a scientific specimen. At no point did anyone suggest that I might have rights as a sapient being or that my consent might be required for your experiments. The conference room fell silent as the implications of Marcus's words settled into their consciousness. Even in their supposedly enlightened modern era, the Zephyrians had automatically treated the human as an object to be studied rather than a being to be respected. The attitudes that enabled the cleansing protocol are still present in galactic civilization. Marcus continued relentlessly. You view Death World species as curiosities or threats, never as equals. The only reason I'm speaking with you as a person rather than being dissected as a specimen is because I have the power to prevent you from treating me otherwise. Captain Zethkora struggled to find words that might somehow mitigate the horror of what his crew had planned to do. We meant no harm. Scientific research is conducted with the highest ethical standards. We would never have... Captain, Marcus interrupted. You revived me without consent, restrained me against my will, and began medical examinations without asking permission. If I had been a member of any recognized galactic species, those actions would have been classified as kidnapping and assault. But because I'm human, you consider them acceptable scientific procedure. The holographic display changed again, this time showing fleet positions throughout the galaxy. Hundreds of markers indicated the locations of human vessels, all positioned in patterns that suggested careful strategic planning rather than random exploration. The Human Reclamation Force has spent 2 centuries preparing for this moment, Marcus said. We have developed technologies that account for the weaknesses of every major galactic species. We have established hidden installations throughout known space. And, most importantly, we have learned to work together with a level of coordination and determination that galactic civilization has never seen before. Dr. Vexteros stared at the fleet positions with growing horror. How many ships? How many survivors are there really? Currently, operational human population stands at approximately 47 million individuals distributed across 137 hidden installations. Marcus replied with clinical precision. Our industrial capacity includes 15 major shipyards, 43 research facilities, and 68 resource extraction operations, all completely undetected by galactic monitoring systems. The numbers hit the Zephyrian crew like physical blows. They had assumed they were dealing with a handful of survivors hiding in remote systems. Instead, they were facing an entire civilization that had been rebuilding in secret while the rest of the galaxy believed it was extinct. What do you want? Captain Zethkora asked quietly. What is the Human Reclamation Force planning to do? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice carried the weight of 2 centuries of planning and preparation. We want what every species wants, Captain. We want to exist. We want to develop. We want to explore and grow and create new possibilities for ourselves and our descendants. The holographic display shifted to show the current territories of all galactic powers, but now with additional markers indicating potential human settlement areas and resource requirements for a growing civilization. The difference is that we now know what happens to species that develop in ways that make galactic civilization uncomfortable, Marcus continued. We know about the cleansing protocol. We know about the stability initiative. And we know exactly which governments and institutions were responsible for eliminating our predecessors. The star map zoomed out to show the entire galaxy, with human fleet positions forming a pattern that surrounded and penetrated every major political entity. The strategic implications were terrifying. Humans had somehow managed to position themselves for simultaneous action against every significant galactic power. The message we're sending to galactic civilization is very simple, Marcus said. Death World species are returning to the galaxy. We're stronger than we were before. We're more organized than any civilization you've ever encountered, and we remember everything that was done to our predecessors. Dr. Vexterau realized with crystalline clarity that they were witnessing the beginning of a fundamental change in galactic civilization. You're declaring war on the entire galaxy. Marcus shook his head slowly. Doctor, we're not declaring war. We're declaring that the war that began with the cleansing protocol is finally entering its second phase. The holographic display changed one final time, showing a single message that appeared in the native languages of every major galactic species. The Human Reclamation Force formally announces the return of Death World species to galactic civilization. All governments that participated in the cleansing protocol have 30 standard days to acknowledge their crimes and begin reparation negotiations. Failure to respond will be interpreted as continued hostile intent toward Death World species and will result in appropriate defensive measures. This message is being transmitted simultaneously to every major government, military installation, and news organization in the galaxy, Marcus explained as the crew stared at the display in shock. Within hours, every sapient being in known space will be aware that humans survived the Cascade event and have spent 2 centuries preparing for our return. Captain Zethkora found his voice despite the crushing weight of what he was witnessing. What happens to us? To my crew and my ship? Marcus looked around the conference room, meeting the eyes of each crew member in turn. You're going to deliver a second message. Captain, you're going to return to Zephyrian space and tell your government exactly what you've learned about human capabilities and intentions. And if they don't believe us, Marcus smiled, and for the first time since his revival, the expression contained something that might have been humor. Captain, in 72 hours, every major galactic power is going to receive a demonstration of human technological advancement that will make our intentions impossible to ignore. The conference room fell silent as the implications of Marcus's words settled into their consciousness. The galaxy was about to be reminded why Death World species had once been feared and why some extinctions should never be reversed. The age of galactic stability is over, Marcus said quietly. The age of Death World Renaissance has begun. In the depths of space, hidden human installations began implementing protocols that had been 2 centuries in the making. The galaxy had spent those centuries believing it was safe from the chaos and unpredictability of Death World species. It was about to discover just how wrong that assumption had been. The hunters were about to become the hunted, and Marcus Chun was just the beginning.